Mom, you just don't get it. You're too old to understand. My son Jason's words hung in the air between us, sharp and dismissive. At 53, I didn't feel particularly old, but in that moment, looking at my 20-year-old son's frustrated face, the generation gap between us felt like a canyon. We stood in our kitchen, afternoon light streaming through the windows, illuminating college brochures and loan papers scattered across the table. I'd just suggested he reconsider taking a gap year before transferring to an expensive out-of-state university. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly, gathering the papers into a neat pile. "Maybe I am too old to understand your world." Something in my tone made Jason pause. He'd expected an argument, another round in our ongoing debate about his future. Instead, I simply placed the stack of papers in front of him and walked out. "What are you doing?" he called after me. I turned in the doorway. "Letting you make your own decisions. You're an adult now. If I'm too old to understand, then I'm too old to interfere." I didn't realize then how those words would change everything between us. Jason had always been bright, but impulsive. Even as a child, he wanted to learn every lesson firsthand. At 7, despite my warnings, he climbed the tallest tree in our backyard, resulting in a broken arm. At 12, he spent all his birthday money on a gaming system, then regretted not having funds for games. I'd been a single mother since Jason was 5, when his father decided family life wasn't for him and moved across the country. I worked 2 jobs to keep us in a decent school district, saved for his college fund, and tried to give him both roots and wings. His first 2 years at community college went smoothly. He lived at home, worked part-time at an electronics store, and earned good grades. The plan had always been to transfer to a 4-year university afterward. But somewhere in his 2nd year, Jason's plans changed. "I need a break, Mom. I'm thinking of taking a year off before transferring, maybe traveling, figuring out what I really want to do." "With what money?" I asked, practical as always. He shrugged. "I've got some savings, and Marcus knows a guy who can get me a job bartending in Miami. The tips are supposed to be amazing." Marcus was Jason's new friend, a charming but somewhat aimless young man who seemed to have a guy who knows a guy for everything. "Bartending requires experience," I pointed out, "and Miami is expensive." "See, this is the problem," Jason sighed. "You always focus on the obstacles, never the possibilities." As weeks passed, Jason's gap year idea evolved. No longer content with just bartending in Miami, he now planned to transfer to an exclusive private university afterward, one with tuition nearly triple what we'd saved. When I suggested staying in state to save money, the arguments began. "College isn't just about classes, Mom. It's about connections, experiences, building a network." "Networks don't pay student loans," I'd counter. It was the latest of these discussions that led to his declaration that I was too old to understand. And perhaps he was right. I hadn't attended a prestigious university or taken gap years to find myself. My life had been one of practical decisions and delayed gratification, all the things Jason seemed determined to avoid. In the days following our kitchen confrontation, I kept my word. When Jason talked about his plans, I listened without comment. When he asked what I thought, I turned the question back to him. When he left brochures and financial aid forms for me to review, I left them untouched. "Aren't you going to look at these?" he asked, pointing to the university papers. "You know my thoughts," I replied, "but this is your decision now." Jason's frustration was palpable. He'd expected me to fight, to eventually give in. My hands-off approach left him unbalanced. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll figure it out myself." And so he did. He secured a spot at the expensive university, deferred for 1 year. He gave notice at his job, sold his gaming equipment for cash, and made plans with Marcus for Miami. Through it all, I maintained my neutral stance. "We're leaving next Tuesday," he told me over dinner. "Marcus found us a place to crash until we get our own apartment." "A place to crash?" I asked. "His cousin's friend has a couch we can use for a couple weeks, just until we find jobs." Every maternal instinct wanted to point out the flaws, the lack of job security, the temporary housing, the dependence on strangers. Instead, I nodded and asked if he needed help packing. The night before he left, I found Jason frowning over his budget. His estimates for Miami seemed wildly optimistic, but I kept quiet. When he caught me watching, uncertainty crossed his face. "Do you think I'm making a mistake?" he asked, his voice smaller than before. It was my opening to pull him back from what I saw as a precipice. But I remembered his words, "You're too old to understand," and knew my cautions would only push him away. "I think you're making a choice," I said. "And choices come with consequences, both good and bad. The question isn't whether you'll face challenges. You will. It's whether you're prepared to handle them." He straightened his shoulders. "I can handle anything." The confidence of youth, so beautiful, so fragile. The next morning, I hugged him goodbye as he loaded his bags into Marcus's car. "Call me when you get there," I said, pressing an envelope into his hand. "And if you need anything, I'm here." "What's this?" he asked. "Just a letter. Read it when you get to Miami." Inside was a note wishing him well, along with a prepaid debit card with enough money for a bus ticket home, just in case. Jason's first few weeks in Miami were, by his telling, everything he'd hoped for. His calls and texts were full of beaches, clubs, and excitement. He and Marcus found a small apartment with 2 other guys. He landed a job washing dishes, with promises of bartending training. "The manager says I could be mixing drinks within a month," he told me, voice bright with optimism. I didn't mention he'd said the same thing weeks earlier. I didn't point out that dishwashing wouldn't cover rent in Miami. I just listened and kept my worries to myself. The tone of his communications shifted around the 2-month mark. Calls became less frequent, texts more vague. When I asked about finances, his answers grew evasive. "It's all good, Mom, just a little tight this month." It was nearly 3 months into his gap year adventure when the call came at 1 a.m. "Mom?" Jason's voice was tight, controlled, but I heard the strain. "What's wrong?" I was already reaching for my glasses. "Everything. I messed up, really bad." The story unfolded. The restaurant had cut his hours. Marcus had moved out suddenly, leaving Jason with more rent. The other roommates had fallen behind on bills. The electricity was shut off. The landlord was threatening eviction. "I don't know what to do," he said finally. "I've got maybe $100 left." "Have you used the card I gave you?" I asked. A beat of silence. I lost it. The first week we were here. I meant to tell you, but I was embarrassed." Of course he had. "I could come get you," I offered, "or send money for a bus ticket." Another silence. I could almost hear him wrestling with pride versus desperation. "Can I come home?" he asked finally, voice small like a child after a nightmare. "Just until I figure things out?" "Of course," I said, relief washing over me. "You can always come home." Jason arrived 2 days later, thinner, with shadows under his eyes. He'd sold most belongings for the bus ticket, arriving with little more than a backpack and humbled spirit. For days, we danced around each other awkwardly. He spent most time in his room. I didn't press for details about Miami. Didn't say, "I told you so," though temptation was there. I gave him space to process his failure. A week later, I came home to find him surrounded by community college brochures and job applications. "I've been thinking," he said. "I could re-enroll for spring semester, pick up where I left off." I sat down. "That sounds like a good plan." And I called my old boss. He might have a position opening next month. I nodded, trying not to show too much approval, letting him own his decisions. "About what I said before I left," he began. "About you being too old to understand. I was wrong." "Were you?" I kept my voice neutral. "Yeah. You understood exactly what would happen, didn't you? That's why you let me go. You knew I had to learn for myself. I considered this. I knew you wouldn't believe me if I just told you. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be experienced." "It was an expensive lesson," he grimaced. "In every way. The best ones usually are." 2 years have passed since Jason's failed Miami adventure. He's back, at community college, now transferring to a state university with reasonable tuition. He works part-time, lives at home to save money, and has become obsessive about budgeting. Sometimes I hear him advising his younger cousins about impulsive decisions and the importance of planning. I hide my smile when he says things that could have come directly from me years ago. Last week, comparing notes on his financial aid package, he looked up suddenly. "You know what I still don't understand? Why didn't you stop me? You knew Miami would be a disaster." I put down my pen. "Would you have listened if I'd tried?" He considered this, then shook his head. "Probably not." "That's why. Sometimes love means letting go, even when it's hard." "But you could have saved me from all that trouble." "I couldn't have saved you," I corrected gently. "I could only have delayed the lesson. Sometimes the best thing a parent can do is let their child fall when the stakes are relatively low." Jason nodded slowly. "I get that now. But weren't you afraid? That something bad could happen?" "Terrified," I admitted. "I checked my phone hourly. I had saved for a plane ticket to Miami in case you needed me to come get you." He laughed. "Always with a backup plan." "Always," I smiled. "That's what being old enough to understand gets you. The wisdom to know what might happen and the patience to let it unfold anyway." As I watch my son now, more mature and thoughtful, I don't regret letting him learn the hard way. The lesson cost him time, money, and pride. But what he gained, self-knowledge, humility, perspective, these are things I could never have given him. Sometimes, being a good parent means knowing when to step back and let life be the teacher. Even when you're old enough to understand exactly how painful those lessons might be,